Well, as you have rightly said, it is unfortunate that Afenifere has become splintered into so many factions, particularly since the appointment of late Chief Ayo Adebanjo as acting leader of Afenifere. So it will take a lot of effort to bring Afenifere together once again. As it is now, you have the Adebanjo faction, which is now being led by one Oba Olaitan, who also calls himself leader of Afenifere. You have, of course, our national leader, which the whole world knows, the authentic leader, Ruben Fasoroti. It had been expected that after Adebanjo's death, Chief Fasoroti would take bold moves to reunite all of the entire world of Afenifere. Because as I've said many times, Afenifere, in fact, right now consists of more than 2 factions. Because we only talk of 2 factions, the Fasoroti faction and the Adebanjo faction. But that split only began about 4 years ago, between the 2. But there have been splits in Afenifere starting from maybe 2003, after the loss of elections by most of the UPN governors, except Tinubu in Lagos, and also most of our senators and House of Reps members. Of course, all of this happened because of a betrayal by Obasanjo, whom we supported at that time, because it was our policy to support him for election as a Yoruba man, so that he will have a second term. We didn't support him for his first term, but we decided to support him for a second term, so that the Yorubas at least can have 2 terms. But he betrayed us. He betrayed us and actively worked against us. And then Stanley worked against us using INEC. So they swept away most of the governors and the legislators. So since that time, there have been splits. There was a split between the former AD governors and the Afenifere leadership. So that split gave birth to what we now call the former governors were from the different factions. There was a split again by some of the younger men within Afenifere who formed the Afenifere renewal group led by Osun. Afenifere is now, there are at least 4 or 5 different camps that we can call Afenifere members, into which we are split now. Because the former members of the Afenifere renewal group, they are all Afenifere members. We were all together. All the people who were under the leadership of Ayo Fasomi, because there was a time the break was between the leadership of Ayo Fasomi and the leadership of Fasoroti. The former governors were under the leadership of Ayo Fasomi, and those of us who considered ourselves the authentic Afenifere, loyal to the leadership, were under the leadership of Fasoroti. So that was the main split before. And then it is now the Fasoroti group that is now further split into the Fasoroti, into the Akure faction, and the Ekoku faction led by Adebanjo. Yeah, that's the current. Yes, if we are going to make Afenifere relevant once more, we have to try to bring together not only the Akure group and the Igbo group, but also all the previous factions that had broken away from Afenifere since 2003. All the splinter groups have to come together. So the unison of all those groups that formed the AD, that shook the West, formidable, that made the Afenifere formidable together again under one umbrella. What caused that was, number one, in 2019, Papa Fasoroti, I guess, he felt his health was not too strong, and he felt it was not virile enough to give Afenifere the kind of leadership that he desired. So he decided to step aside and appointed Adebanjo as acting leader. This is not uncommon in Afenifere. In fact, it is the practice in Afenifere, because it also happened when even during the Nadeco period. During the Nadeco period, Ajasin was the de facto leader of the Nadeco. But Ajasin's help wasn't as strong as it could be. So Adesoya was the one that was in fact actually leading Nadeco. And most people, Adesoya that faced the brunt of the Nadeco, so faced all the terror groups and so on. But Ajasin was the leader. All meetings were still held in Owo under Baba Ajasin. So as long as Baba Ajasin was still alive, all meetings were always held in Owo, even though Adesoya was leading the group. In the same way, after Ajasin's death, and Adesoya became the substantive leader, when Adesoya himself was getting frail and unable to give active leadership, he appointed, with all of us, he appointed, with the consent of all of us, he appointed Chief Ruben Fasoroti as the acting leader. So Chief Ruben Fasoroti became the acting leader, while Adesoya was on his sick bed. But all that time, meetings continued to be held in Adesoya's home. Till Adesoya died, meetings were being held at Ijebu, even though Fasoroti was the acting leader. So this has been the practice. I gave this background so that we can now see what caused the crisis when Chief Adebayo was appointed acting leader. Some people expected that the meetings would continue to be held in Akure, even though Adebayo was now the acting leader. Fortunately, Chief Adebayo took the meeting immediately to his hometown in Ijebu. And the people who felt that a lot of people felt this should not have happened. So because of that, many people refused to attend the meeting of Afenifere in Ogun. That they still believe that the meeting should be held in Akure. In fact, I remember the first meeting that we had in Ogun, a member raised the issue of why, in fact, Adebayo should be made acting leader, why he was not made substantive leader. But Chief Adebayo himself calmed the person and said that the issue shouldn't be raised. So the issue died. So he remained acting leader. But as acting leader, first, many people were disgruntled that it wasn't meeting at Akure, that it was meeting at Ogo. But an even greater subject of dissatisfaction was that I think there was not enough consultation between him as acting leader and the substantive leader. Adebayo began to act as the leader. I think that is the genesis of the friction. In other words, he believed that he was already the leader, and instead of consulting with Ruben Fasoroti in his decisions, he was taking those decisions. He was the leader. For example, in deciding to support Peter Obi and the Labour Party for the 2023 election, he did not consult with Fasoroti. Talking of consultation with the leader, he did not consult with Fasoroti. So this was I'm sure a lot of people didn't find this funny at all. So that is why that was the final straw that really made the split almost become open. And that is why you now had some groups who were initially meeting at Ogo with Adebayo. They stopped coming to Ogo and went back to Akure. So the meeting now fissured into two. The Ogo meeting at Akure. All efforts to reconcile the two leaders were futile until Adebayo died. This is the genesis. The causes were, one, the fact that the meetings were shifted immediately from Akure, and secondly, that there was no longer consultations between the acting leader and the substantive leader. So the substantive leader felt completely shunted off. These were the issues. That is why, for instance, a lot of us felt that with the unfortunate death of Chief Adebayo, that something good could have come out of that, because with the acting leader no longer around, Fasoroti was now in a position to call everybody together under one umbrella and either to take over back the leadership if he felt strong enough, or if he didn't feel strong enough, to appoint another acting leader. These are the things I believe he should. Up to now, he has not done that. He has taken a half measure. I call it half measure because at the last meeting they had in Akure, he appointed Chief Olufalaye, who is himself now an Oba. Olufalaye is an Oba of his village of Iluabo near Akure. He appointed him to be chairman of the ESCO, of the executive committee. So, but being chairman of the executive committee does not make him leader of Afenifere. So, fine, it makes him chairman of the Akure faction, of the executive committee of the Akure faction. That is simply that is not the correct step to take. So, the expectation, at least from people like me, is that Fasoroti, as the accepted leader of Afenifere, will call together all members who believe they still belong to the Afenifere family and appoint an acting leader who can then embark on the task of reuniting all members of Afenifere.